Okay, so we are live. I'm so excited to be here with one of our Texas House of Representatives and two school counselors who are representing in Austin, Texas. I'm Cameron Gerard Greer. I'm one of the organizers at Texas A&T. I used to teach for in the classroom for 10 years. I taught middle and high school English, and I'm just interested in having this conversation with some school counselors, especially in regards to mental health, how to help our students deal with anxiety and the stress and trauma of dealing with COVID at the same time, as well as having to also manage taking the STAR test this year. And so I want to introduce our Texas House of Representatives member, Mary González, who has since 2012 been representing the great area of El Paso, Texas, and has been listed as for the Latino leaders, one of the leading figures as it relates to education, and who has a doctorate in education. And so we're so glad to have Representative Mary González. And I will like to introduce Jennifer. I'll let Jennifer and Stephanie give you all their background. And I'll start with Jennifer.
All right. Hello, I'm Jennifer Lamb. I'm a middle school counselor starting my 5th year in Austin. I taught for 4 years up in the Richardson area. It's second and third careers, so I have some other background too. I'm originally from the Massachusetts and New England area. I love in Austin. Been in Texas for more than half my life. I'm not going to say how much that is or how long that
is. Stephanie.
Yeah, my name is Stephanie Reyna. I'm a 3rd-year counselor in Austin. I lived in Austin a little over 7 years, but I actually am from El Paso. So yeah, I was a teacher for a while. I worked with kids who have autism. I've just had my hand in a couple educational fields and psychology fields, and I landed in school counseling. This is what I love to do. I love to work with kids, and so that's why this work is so important to us and to me. So I'm just grateful to be here.
Well, I'll go ahead and kick it off. It is National School Counselor Week and mental health efforts from COVID-19. And I pretty much want to start off with a question to our two counselors of COVID-19 and online learning has increased in massive numbers, which has caused a lot of anxiety and depression in our students and as well as our members, our teachers. So tell us about your experience in the schools in which students dealing with this pandemic and how is it different from pre-COVID and now? And let's throw it to Jen.
Steph, you want to go first?
I think you passed it to you, Jen, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I missed that. I will go. No, Cameron, you're in charge. I will go. My bad. Gosh, it's when I think about the question, we did have a little bit of time to think about it. My list just kind of kept going about all these deficits that students are going to have to recover from when we do get back into whatever the new normal is. And that's just going to increase the needs for school counselors and the stress that's going to be on teachers as well to make sure we get these kids recovered, if you will. But I think of the academic needs. There is no way they can learn online in the same way that they can learn in an in-person environment. So just the deficits from that, the social deficits I see every day, even with the kids that I have on campus, it's not the same when you're in a classroom with 2 or 3 people and you haven't seen your best friend for a year, when social connections are the most important. We know that in middle school, that's when they're really starting to look to their friends. And by high school, it's all about their friends. Mm-hmm. The developmental growth is going to be stunted. Those that were slightly anxious, as Cameron was saying, there was already a rise of anxiety in our country. And now you take an anxious kid, put them in a COVID environment, possibly an anxious parents as well, put them in a COVID environment. And all I can tell you is the phone rings a lot. Like, how do I help my kid? And we start talking about it. And it's about grades and parents not being able to help with online learning. They might have been able to help before. And they're just like, I have no idea how to help. So that anxiety it's increased, I'd say, threefold easily what we were seeing and what we're seeing now. The lack of structure actually came up today in a conversation where kids are at home and don't have the structure. So we're going to have to kind of do a reset on that, and the research behind trauma-informed care and how structure and routine are so important. So that's what I'll add. I'm sure Steph's got more.
Stephanie?
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I definitely agree with all of those points. I think early on when everything was happening after school closed, kids, we were just trying to make connections. We were trying to reach parents, phone calls. We're trying to get those devices out, trying to get Wi-Fi connected. And as we were reaching out, we were just uncovering massive, big underlying needs that were always there. But now we're just put in a crisis. Kids were needing food resources. Parents were, saying my rent is due and I need help. Utilities. There was just so many basic needs that they needed, and also they were worried about getting sick. Parents were worried about losing their jobs, and they were just so stressed. And the kids were socially isolated. They weren't able to see their friends or their family. And as we moved into this new school year, we've just kind of we know schools are trying different things. We're trying to figure this out, but the needs have not really changed. We're still seeing these life stressors. And we know our families are strong and adaptable, but I think overarching the theme that I'm seeing is this chronic worry. And so it's showing up when they talk to us, it's showing up when families talk to us. And I just think they need help, and they're going to continue to need it going in the future.
Thank you. And before I throw it to Representative González, who, as I said earlier, has a doctorate degree in education with a focus in curriculum and instruction and cultural studies, she knows about that everybody doesn't learn the same way. All our kids are different, and there's no certain way to educate our students. And so, having said that, as we celebrate National School Counselors Week, it's important for me to I want our counselors to clarify what counselors actually do. Because I know when I was in school or in earlier generations, they went by guidance counselors, but now our school counselors have been almost like a professional licensed counselor, or almost like a therapist or a social worker. So, Stephanie, can you just give me your definition?
Sure. Well, the reality is that we wear many hats. We do lots of things. Counselors will tell you all kinds of things that they do. But the three areas that we focus on are academic. We're looking at academic achievement. We're looking at career exploration, like what their future entails, and their social emotional well-being. So that comes in the form of direct services, which things we do with kids. We do lessons, we do counseling, we pull groups. And then there's things that we do indirectly on behalf of kids, which working with families, working with teachers, consulting, connecting resources. And so those are the pillars of our job. But the reality is that some of our counselors are tasked with so many things on top, or have just other duties. And so we are just very stretched thin, and we have been, and it looks different at every school. And so we just really, we really want to focus on the kids. That's who and what needs the most support right now.
Jen?
I think Stephanie did a great job. The only things that I would add, and I do believe we kind of have a PR problem as school counselors, not our own doing, but just kind of that old school guidance counselor, that maybe people over 30 remember. It's come a long way. And I do want to clarify, school counselors, many may have LPCs, licensed professional counseling, or similar certifications. It's not a requirement, and we are not allowed to really be a therapist to students. But the skills that are involved, because so many kids, and the stigma involved with getting a therapist, the access to a therapist isn't there. So having those skills is crucial, because we kind of serve as the best opportunity or the best chance students and sometimes parents are going to have at getting any kind of mental health support. And our role can often be that kind of, helping break the ice, having a good experience so that maybe they'll be a little more comfortable, as well as helping them understand there is access to free or reduced price counseling services. But many times, and I think the research is there, they're not going to get it. So while we're not a licensed therapist, we are the closest they're going to get to that. And then the only other thing I really want to add is, as far as what we do, unfortunately, and again, in my 5th year at a very high needs school with lots of additional services, I still find that almost daily I'm doing triage. I am attending to the highest needs that I can. It's responsive services at that triage level, and maybe a phone call falls off my plate because I just can't make that phone call back if I've deemed that it's not a crisis situation. So yeah, I think it's important for folks to know that we could do so much more if we weren't tied up with additional responsibilities.
Well, we have a 4-time elected Texas representative member who is here, and I just want to ask Representative González, Texas AFT is fighting for laws mandating health and safety standards and see that they are enforced for our public schools, as well as ensure the state is able to prepare properly for future pandemics. We know school counselors are having to see way more students than they can effectively, as Jen and Stephanie has testified to. So what can the legislature do?
Oh my gosh, we can do so much. And I think there's a couple of things we should consider. We know counselors are crucial to the holistic care and development of our students. We know that when kids are struggling social, emotionally, it impacts their academics. We know that when kids have career goals, it positively impacts their academics. There are so many ways in which counselors really transform both students and our schools, right? And our neighborhoods. And so we just have to, I'm super excited about School Counselors Week because it's an important moment to honor such important people in our education system. I know firsthand that I would never be who I am. I would have never gotten a PhD program if it wasn't for my local counselor who forced me really to go to college and go away to school. And so it's changed my life. And so that's why I'm so passionate about counselors and education as a whole. So what can we do? Here's the hard part. It's hard for us to do a lot of things as legislators because guess what? In Texas, we only meet 140 days every 2 years. So there's a lot that gets done. It's like chaos theory. But if we focus and work together, we can do everything from increase resources so we can have more counselors. We can create mandates for student counselor ratio. Although I will say if we create that mandate, we should give schools money to meet that mandate. We can create rules and have a bill on this as far as like counselor time, right? Like how much what has happened over the last decade or two is counselors not only in charge, they're now in charge of everything. Oh, administer testing, do this, do that. And instead, we need to say, hey, you should have the flexibility to only work on these counselor duties, right? And really outline what those duties are. And so the legislature can do a lot. That's why I'm here, because I genuinely believe in the power of creating good public policy. But what I'm encouraging everybody to do is if you love your counselor, call your legislator and say, I want counselor bills to get passed this session. Because when we work together as advocates and say how important it is, then we can get good things done.
And to further that question, Representative González, what can we do to ensure that we have more mental health resources in our schools, not just during this pandemic, but beyond this pandemic, especially if we're going to constantly force our students and teachers to prepare for a STAR test? What are we going to do to help them with this anxiety that they feel? Because as our counselor said, they're dealing with stress from home. And now the pandemic, and now with this added sense of having to take a end of year test to assess them. And I can only imagine if they don't do well, it's like, I'm going through all this, but yet so how can we support our students when it comes to mental health?
Gosh, that question really hits home for me. If you think about El Paso, where I represent, we started last school year a week after the tragic shooting in El Paso. So like our kids and our school employees really started in traumatic trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
We ended the school year with a global pandemic. We started the school with a global pandemic. It has been 2 years of trauma. And here's what we know, that kids, students, young people, the number one place where they get the emotional support that they need besides their family is going to be with their local school counselors, right? There's a limited resources for so many of our young people, and it's critical. So how can we make sure it happens? It's a little bit of a complexity here. Because we have a budget deficit. It's not as big as we thought it was going to be, but it's still there. It's harder to say, let's fight for these resources. But we also know the federal government has given us, through CARES Act 1 and 2 and another hopefully relief package, that there'll be some funding for education. One of the things I think we need to advocate for is making sure those resources are earmarked for counselors, right? Because then we can make sure that we are not only increasing resource in this moment of COVID, we can then demonstrate how critical it is to continue this funding. And so I would say advocacy is really critical to fighting for the resources that are needed. And here's the worst part. We've been underfunding counselors in this area for such a long time. That's why you see these ratios of the average school. I think it's like 1 to like over 300 kids per counselor. And what's sad is it's hard for counselors when they have that many kids to really recognize when there are problems in an individual student's lives. And so we've been underfunding it for so long. This is an area where we can fund and need to fund, especially in this moment in time, and then demonstrate how we should continue these resources.
And I will go to the counselors for this question, because as Representative González says, in El Paso, students came with trauma already from what was going on in their community. And as counselors, children bring the trauma that might be occurring to them from the house. It could be sexually abused, or it could be living in poverty, or it could just be life itself, being a teenager or just growing up. So how much time would you say you all spend on non-counseling duties, such as cafeteria duties, when that time could be used to actually help guide a student? Because being a teacher is like, I couldn't do all that I wanted to do. But what would you say? Because I know you all are passionate about being able to help students, but there's duties in school that prevent you from always doing your job title. Stephanie?
Yeah, I would love to talk about what our day-to-day looks like, right? Like I said before, it looks different at every school, but I can give you a snapshot of my first 2 years. So I was training in a program where we were learning the model. We were learning to help students and how we help families and how we're going to support them in all these areas. And then I was so excited. I got a job, and I was doing all the things I had not trained for or put an effort into learning and time and investing into higher education. And I was like, okay, how am I going to fit in being with students, hearing their concerns, and really helping them help themselves, right? And so I was so stretched thin. I feel like it was flipped. I was there only if really there was a crisis. And whatever time I could, I was always stretched and worried about the time because I had different duties. I even had duties that were tied to other needs. Like I was a 504 coordinator, so I had a lot of paperwork and I had a lot of responsibility because these kids needed these plans. And so some of these roles do encompass some part of counseling in our role, but then there's so much part of it that's a lot of data entry and coordinating. And I was like, when am I going to get to see kids? And I managed to squeeze in what I could, but kind of like what Jennifer was saying before with the triage, we were kind of there as a crisis, if there was a crisis or an immediate really emergency need. And so we were doing that preventative bottom, right, of building connections, working with teachers, because it was hard to be available. And so sometimes we did it anyway, and then we ended up staying at school late in the evening, night after night. And so I am very grateful and fortunate that I am given an opportunity this year. I am at a different school, and the program here is ran a little differently. And so I have a lot more time with students. And so I'm just so grateful because I'm they're needing us so much. And so I'm available and I'm able to respond to things a lot quicker than I was before. And so I know we have school counselors out there that may be in different situations. And so, but a lot of my colleagues say that they are stretched in because they're used in so many different areas that don't really fall under our program or what we're really capable of doing.
So Stephanie and I have been talking to a fair amount of school counselors recently, and I think you specifically were asking like percentages, and it does vary. I've seen counselors say they spend 80% of their time on non-counseling duties. And of course, it depends on the time of the year. But the types of duties are 504 coordinating, which done right, when done right, really is a half of a full-time job. But I'll be honest, I don't believe when counselors have that role, they can physically do it to the fullest extent to the benefit of the child. And that is not an insult to counselors. That's just triage. We do it. We check the box. We do as much as we need to. We take care of the legalities of it. We try to make sure everybody's taken care of, but it doesn't serve anybody well in that respect. Campus testing, STAR, end of course, AP, credit by exam, GT testing my first year. I was in tears with the amount of time it took me because we have a high level of students that want or parents that want the GT testing. It was like 2 weeks, you wouldn't see me. And we made a deal. The other counselors took care of what they needed to with my kids. And I was heads down. And there were certain times during testing where none of us were in the counseling suite. We were all up in the testing room for STAR, putting stickers on booklets, putting numbers on spreadsheets, handing out totes to teachers. I mean, the teachers know, they've seen us there. SAT coordinating, ACT, PSAT, master scheduling is a huge time taker. Being this child study team chair, again, chairing something is more administrative, but there's a lot of counselors that are getting stuck with that. Being part of the team, absolutely. Advocating for the kids. Same with 504. Advocating, being part of the committee is fine. I want to help students struggling with ADHD. I don't want to have to do all the paperwork and fight with a system that is just not user-friendly to make sure that everything's done properly. Special education coordinator, I've heard, attendance committee lead, lunch duty to the extent that it's in order to give teachers their minutes. We, of course, want teachers to get their minutes, but if you put a counselor in that role, they can't go if there's a crisis because they're absolutely tied to that role. And I think teachers would probably be upset with the flip side too, right? And I'm seeing some comments come in. I think someone made a very good comment about STAR testing, the most stressful, high anxiety time of the year, and you pull counselors to go help with that duty. Who's going to help the kids that are stressing out? Who's going to do the proactive? I mean, we don't want the STAR test at all, but if we have to, we should be running groups to help these anxious kids keep the level down. There's lots of duties. And then TELPAS chair was the other one that I've heard some counselors get assigned. I mean, it's appalling, the list of non-counselor duties. And the range, 80%, some counselors, 80% of their time is non-counseling. And then there's some in better positions where their administrators are fully pulling resources to do what they can.
Thank you. That brought up a topic for me, especially being in classroom. It was like, I know during STAR season, it's almost like Super Bowl, like you made it to the Super Bowl or a championship game, and it's dealing with that high anxiety stress. And it's like, and teachers, I know we are so relieved when it's finally over because that's how we've been measured throughout the whole year. So Representative González, what do you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am going to put you on the spot. How do you feel about STAR testing? Do you, especially as you study curriculum and instruction, do you see other alternatives beyond taking a standardized test?
Yeah, I mean, I file a bill every session to consider other options. Look, here's what we know. We know we need to know where kids are at. We know that it's important for us, for equity and equality, to know that a school in El Paso is working in the same ways that a school in Dallas or Highland is working. But we also know that the STAR test hasn't been the best evaluator of giving us that information, right? And we also know that in this moment in time, considering all the trauma, even if we give the STAR test, it's not going to give us any accurate information. We already know that 70% of our kids are experiencing significant learning loss. That's 4 million kids across the state of Texas. We know that without even giving the STAR test. So what I will say is, do we need data information to make effective solutions? Yes. Do we actually need good data that is not based on the STAR test? Yes. Do we have other tools and options? Do we have great educators who can give us the information through portfolios or through other assessment tools? Then yes. And so, but I also think in this moment in time, it's really hard to get any accurate data because there's been so much variance in the realities of children's and families' lives. So I have been advocating for a pause in the STAR test this year. I have been advocating for a change in assessment and accountability systems as a whole beyond this year, and I will continue to fight for those things.
And I'm glad, and I only asked that question because it's so much money that we spend. We spend millions giving out the STAR test, millions when it can be spent on more teacher assistants, more assistance for our school counselors and school support staff, and then also increase the pay of our cafeteria workers, and bus drivers. So we spend over up there in millions on the STAR testing. And I just remember I had my last year teacher had a student who I taught when I was teaching English too. He failed the STAR test and he was just devastated. And I had another student who for 3 straight years failed the same test. And it was just, he felt unworthy and I had to help him dream again. And so in thinking about dreaming, Stephanie and Jen, if we lived in a perfect world, how would school counseling look like to you all? If you had if Representative González was able to pass every bill and find resources, because I know you do so much. So what would be your dream as a school counselor? Stephanie?
Sure. I think I'm thinking about not just my dream as a school counselor, but everybody out there that works late, goes in early, that wears many hats and is spread thin. I would say a school counselor who can service the kids in the best way they can for their population and for their community, one that is not worried about a time, a deadline, or a clock, and can really get deep with kids and really understand their needs. One who can offer awesome, amazing programming, like doing career days and citizenship days and doing college and vocational exploration, just really dedicating time to, anger and emotion and health support and mental health support. These are just some things like I know we want to do. Or I was thinking, I've been wanting to run a girls empowerment group for a long time, and I'm really kind of planning it out, and I might be able to do it this year. And I'm like, I want everyone to be able to meet the need of their school, use data to inform it, use the anecdotes and the qualitative pieces from the families, and then create a comprehensive school counseling program that meets those needs. And I want that for every school counselor because it's going to have an effect on students and teachers and staff. It's going to just have this positive effect. And we will be spending more time looking at positive outcomes and graduation, and versus always, I feel like we're reacting a lot, and we're not versus preventative and starting at the bottom of the pyramid. We're always putting band-aids on things because that's the only thing that we're able to do. So that's kind of like a snapshot. If we could just wait, we have that solution-focused question. If you can wait, that's what you did, Cameron. That's a question we use a lot. If you can wave a magic wand, if you can kind of see yourself doing what it is that you want or need to be doing. And so that's an amazing question. So that's kind of what I see. And I'm sure Jennifer, agrees that this is what we want for everyone across the state.
In my dream, again, very similar, there's a ramp model, a recognized ASCA model, man, every school would have one of those, and they're data driven and they're 100% student focused. And there's no point to recreate the wheel. It's there. We just need to have the time to do it. And in my perfect world, also, we would make mental health part of PE. So counselors would have time, like PE, your physical health is so tied to mental health, that we would do a shift to really drive the point home that they are related. It's all about the whole child. And you can't just go run a lap, you'll feel better. Okay, yeah, that might help. But tie that mental health into PE. And then I think, just to speak a little bit to the everything needs funding, is I don't know the time, but if we could all get to the RAMP model or something close and be supported in that by having 0 non-counseling duties, I don't know how many years it would take, 5 years, 10 years, all of a sudden that money the money wouldn't be there. Like, you wouldn't be spending money because of the returns. Less students going to ALC or, alternative learning centers, more students graduating, less interventions, students' attendance rates would be higher. Districts would have a lot more money if there were more students in the class. So I don't know what the time frame is when you say to get your return on the investment, but I absolutely think it's worthwhile.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you all were able to have that space to share your dreams. So I would ask Representative González, if you were able to have your dream of passing bills and legislation in regards to education and school counseling and mental health support, how would that look?
Oh, I would pass all of my bills. Yes, first I would start with equitably and effectively funding our public school systems, right? A lot of the problems that arise that we see not giving counselors what they need is funding based, right? We have not enough counselors. We're not giving them all the tools. We're overworking them. And then not only just counselors, but other support staff that are necessary. So counselors aren't having to do some of the other extra work that maybe they could be doing other things like focusing on social emotional learning for kids. And I'll give an example. I was really fortunate that I had some of the best counselors, like I talked about. And I had a counselor who would meet with kids who'd gone through a bad divorce. And so my parents are divorced, and she would meet with me every Friday, and she recognized that I needed a little extra help, right? And that recognition helped me get on a good path for life. And imagine if she hadn't done that, or I didn't have the space to do that. I feel so fortunate because I could have really just been a different version of myself. And so first and foremost, bills I would pass. I'd pass great. We did a lot already, the legislature, but there's still more to do. And school finance, do that. Second, I would do counselor ratios, which is one of my bills. And I'm going to ask whoever's AFT out there, because I cannot remember bill numbers to save my life, to put that in the chat. So the counselor work time bill, which is HB 589. And then I would also do the counselor ratio bill that I've also filed. It's very important. So those are the 3 bills that I would work on in order to make sure we're giving counselors all the support that they need.
Thank you. And so as we talk about everything is based on funding, for our school counselor, I want you to let our audience know, if as I said before, when I was teaching, I had the last school I was at, we had a school counselor, a therapist, a behavior specialist, and as Stephanie said earlier, all that doesn't exist in every school. And usually it goes to the schools I taught at nothing but Title I schools, where it's high poverty. And though they may have therapists and behavior specialists, I know it doesn't meet the ratio of being able to support the students. So as we deal with this issue of mental health, and what type of support or assistance would you need beyond just doing the data entry? What other type of school support, or are we not maximizing? And that could either Jennifer.
Sure. I've worked with having a school-based therapist as well. And yes, if, one person can only see 30, I mean, we had one that maxed out at 40, but when you talk about a population of 1,200 students, that's just a drop in the bucket, and they still don't get to them all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's certainly not enough. But getting counselors back to, or just getting them to, I'm not sure it's getting them back, right? But getting them moving forward and getting them to where we can spend 100% of our time on counseling duties. And that's indirect and direct, right? That means we have stuff we do behind the scenes, but that doesn't mean 504 coordinating or STAR testing or GT testing or any of that. That's the program support we need, whether it's data dives to make sure having advisory councils with community, parents, students to find out and evaluate our programs every year. The extra support, if we could, counselors could do their job and get that ratio down to 250-1 and have 100% counseling duties. I don't know. I mean, it'd be a dream to say I want more than that. I'd take that. That is a dream to take that. Just to get us to where we're doing what we're trained to do. And I know when I taught, I had 180 kids my first year, and everybody's like, that's a ton. But I was able to get to know them all. So a 250-1 ratio, man, just imagine what we could do if we really had the time to get to know them and do home visits and really get to know the families. Sure, extra support, continue to have a parent support specialist, right? Communities and schools, again, they can only serve maybe 100 students out of 1,200. There's still so much need there. So those support systems are important. And I'm at a school where I'm lucky enough to have some of those. So those types of things at every school would be nice. I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think if we were to start and get the ratio down, just like Jennifer said, that will also enable us to identify exactly what the needs are. And so, yes, like there's lots of support staff, and we have good resources with communications with community resources. So we have the partnerships that work with our schools and outside of school, and we connect them. But if the ratio was down, we could really do a deep dive into the data and also meet with people. And I think we would understand our kids more. So we will be able to identify their needs better. Because sometimes that's what it is we do a quick in and a quick phone call, and then we have to kind of make a decision of how we're going to intervene versus really exploring and noticing trends. Because especially this year, we are starting to see trends. And now we can, if we had more time and there was more of the ratios were less, we could really start grouping the trends to the need. And so every school and every population is going to be different. And so it's not a one size fits all, because it's not. Our communities are different, and we want that community itself and that mental health well-being team, which will include teachers, which will include admin, includes everybody. Everybody's a stakeholder. I guess that's what I envision. Will inform the program, like you said, we'll evaluate it and look at it. Then we can respond, and like that would just be beautiful. But we need to start with those ratios, because if we're so stretched thin and we have too many kids to even know what their needs are, how can we even do that? How can we begin to build that? So I just appreciate all of you all that are on today and hearing this, because we need advocates. We need to bring these ratios down and get more school counselors on our campus.
I would also like to point out when you talk about the ratios that students have with counselors, the ratio that some of our teachers have, where it's almost 35 students in a classroom versus one teacher, or how one school nurse is supposed to support all the students. So imagine if all of them get hurt at the same time. What can that nurse do? But I want to ask this question to Representative González. What are you hearing from the parents, teachers, and counselors in your district? In El Paso?
I mean, I think what I'm hearing is just how critical schools have been during this global pandemic, especially for like rural communities where I represent. The schools are such a hub for so many of the other things, whether it's what's happening with state laws regarding COVID, access to vaccines for their family members, food, lunch programs, and breakfast, lunch, and even sometimes dinner programs, just like literally a full stop shop, which is why if you look at what happened, the schools that were able to really engage in what was needed in this moment were our community schools. And so we need to do a greater investment in making sure we have as many community school investments as possible, because we've seen how they work, whether it's a COVID global pandemic or not a global pandemic. They just are really transformative in kids and communities' lives. I'm hearing that education is the number one thing. Even through a global pandemic, you see so many people coming together to make sure kids are still trying to learn. And so you see families and parents and neighbors all coming together to make this work. And so I think that what's really difficult is we have so many issues to address in less than 140 days now, but everybody thinks it's really important and serious.
And I would say Stephanie and Jennifer are so passionate about this, and we want to make sure that you're able to do stuff in the legislature. So what can Representative González, what can the people do? In other words, can you give us a process of how do we contact our legislature? Do we just make phone calls, leave a message, or mail, or email, or text message, or protest, or
calm down. No protests because it's COVID. But that's a great question. What creates public policy change, right? So I think it has to be a strategic and intentional force. Basically, you do it all. You do social media, you do calls, you do letters, and you set up meetings with your local legislators. And you don't just set up one meeting, you set up a meeting every single month, because I'm telling you, the squeaky wheel gets it done. And I know it's like a long time saying in politics, but think about it this way. There's some mornings where I wake up and have to deal, should bison be wildlife or livestock? What are we doing with the electrical grid? What are we doing with, COVID vaccines? And there's so many different issues, thousands of issues that are in my head. As much as a lot of my colleagues care, and they do, or so many of us do, we're just getting pulled in a lot of different directions. So sometimes we need somebody to wrangle us back in. Hey, don't forget this. And I think it's really important for y'all to be visible, to be present, to be frequent, to be strategic. And I will also say this. I tell people all the time, like, I'm kind of my leadership style is you catch more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. People like to help when they know that there's a need. So just express your need and say, like, look, I'm not trying to make your life difficult. I'm trying to say, here's how I want to make our community better together. And I think a lot of legislators will respond to that.
And I would say to spotlight what Texas AFT does, we are running campaigns, and if you are trying to, we're trying to hear your story. So if you are passionate about mental health and supporting school counselors and passing legislation that helps our students, create a video. Write a letter and give it to us so that we can fight for you. That's what Texas AFT is here for, to fight for our teachers. And so before we leave, I want to give Jennifer and Stephanie an opportunity to ask you a question, Representative. And Stephanie, did you?
Well, I just want to say thank you, first of all. I know you mentioned your personal story about school counselors, and you've had an awesome journey in education. I feel like so I know you're motivated. I know you're here, and I'm actually really excited that this has such a personal connection for you, because I think when we're talking because I was at Lobby Day 2 years ago, I was walking down those halls trying to get people to hear us about some of these same issues we're talking about. So what are we going to do collectively, and I say together with you, that's going to make the difference this year versus in years past, that we can start the change and move the needle. And we've talked about so many great ideas and so many things today, but ultimately what's it going to take from all of us and from you together to make this change? Like, what's it really going to take? that's where I'm at. I'm ready to help move the needle, you know.
You and me both, girl. You and me both. Let's move the needle. So I want to quickly give a shout out to my local AFT, Socorro AFT, which is really good at doing this. Like, Lily and Veronica back there, they call me all the time, and I have a great relationship with them. So how do we move the needle? I was on a panel earlier today, and we talked about how relationships are what moves the needle, whether it's you and me, or me and another colleague on the Republican side who work together on things. So relationships. So more than anybody as counselors how to build authentic relationships. So I would say, okay, maybe we don't get all the bills we need done this time because of COVID. Fair. But start to build that authentic relationship and meet with tell your story to your legislator, meet with them for like a virtual coffee and to look at like, maybe we don't always know what we need right now, but let's build a relationship and focus on that. The outcomes will then speak for themselves. But I think that's the best way to move the needle. I've seen how I've been able to move the needle on LGBTQ equality and justice just by telling my story and just by building those authentic relationships.
Thank you, Mary.
Jennifer?
Well, mine's somewhat related, I guess. It's about the process. I don't even remember how many years ago, before I got back into before I finished my degree, I'd go down to the Capitol and watch. And I was always looking for the bills related to school counseling and education. Honestly, I remember sitting in one about testing, where a bunch of kids came up on a bus from a school district and sat there and talked about the standard core versus Texas, and then all the lobbyists. I mean, I was amazed by how many people were out there because of it was testing, right? So the lobbyists, everything I went to, there weren't many people. And there's all these guys in suits. And I just had to assume they all worked for the testing companies, right? So what do we do to fight some of that, right? How do we make a difference? And I understand the relationship part. I absolutely do. But when I know the millions, if not billions of dollars that are at stake, that's why all those people were showing up when I was sitting in those committee hearings and watching. And then the other part is, how do we get it out of committee? I mean, that may be relationships, but what are the nuts and bolts to get something, whether it's about testing or counselor at time, it's got to get out of committee. And I get frustrated, and I'm never giving up. I am very passionate about it. What is the trick there? And you might have the same answer about relationships. I appreciate that.
No, I think, so here's what I will say, and I actually worked on an article about this on my academic side hat, but so politics matter. So here's what's been really great about seeing, yes, we need to advocate for policies, but also we can't just do it during session. We have to get involved in campaigns, and we have to make it an issue during the campaign season. So if we think about how did HB3 happen, where we invested billions of dollars into our school system that had been underfunded for so long, that's because Republicans and Democrats are both hearing on the campaign trail that that's what voters wanted. So I think we just need to all the time continue to plant those seeds. Testing isn't working. And then the other thing I will say is I do think one of the reasons we haven't changed accountability and assessment in Texas is because there's so many education groups and everyone has a different idea. We need a coalition of all the groups saying this is this plan, because what happens is, oh, you want to change something? What do you replace it with? And then every group has a different idea. And then legislators like, oh, I don't know. I don't know where to go with this. So coming together, making I'm all about strategy, making a strategic plan, and then making that part of the conversation during the election cycle is the full circle of how to get it out of committee, in my opinion.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for giving up your time tonight. And I'm just going to ask if you all can give like a 60-second closing remarks about about where we go, where do we go from here? And I'll start with Jen.
Well, first of all, thank you. Maybe that should be the end of it, but thank you very much for just this platform and opportunity to help move the counselor's role forward and what we do. We know how important it is. Representative González clearly knows how important it is. And I know a lot of the folks who tune in here are teachers. Hopefully counselors have tuned in as well. And I just want to say that we are team players. And what I don't want this to turn into is, well, you know, teachers have their own platform and counselors have their own platform. We are in this together, and I am there to help students. I'm there to help teachers. And when I help students, it helps teachers. And when I help teachers, it helps students. And when I help parents, it helps teachers. And when teachers call parents, it helps us all. And I hope that we can support each other going forward. And one of the big things is helping correct the kind of misperceptions about what school counselors do. So ask us questions. Make sure you know what your school counselors are doing, can do, and we are there to support you as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. Stephanie?
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I am so grateful that we have so many people listening. You all have given us time to kind of shed light on what we do. I would love if a person who I could say, hey, do you know what a school counselor does? And even people on my campus or previous schools, or, you know, and they could kind of tell me, yes, our school counselor does all these awesome, amazing things for our kids. Like, that would be a really cool thing. And the reality is, because our role has been diluted and shifted, we have so many other things. I think the meanings got lost over time, and it's even got lost within ourselves. And so I don't know that we're necessarily getting back to something like Jen said, but I would just love to see school counselors in action. And like Jen said, it takes a team. We collaborate with everyone, and we love our teachers. We couldn't do it without our teachers. Our teachers are usually our first go-to person when, hey, something's going on. And so they know the kids so well. And so we appreciate them so much. And I guess the last thing I want to say is, like, everyone who is kind of fired up, I'm really excited tonight. You know, this is a chance at an opportunity to really shift things that were not working before COVID, and COVID just really exacerbated everything. Now is an opportunity to redo it. We tell the kids often, like, hey, do you need a redo? You need a second try or a restart? Well, now's our reset button. Let's use this. Let's seize it as an opportunity to change it. And so we can get a lot done now to start moving the needle. And like you said, Mary, working in non-legislative years too, to just motivate the campaign. But yeah, let's seize the moment and get to work now.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'm going to leave our final words with Representative Mary González.
Well, thank you, Cameron, and to Jen and to Stephanie. I just really enjoyed this hour of conversation, and everybody watching. The reason I love these things is because I think, again, want everyone out there to know that there's somebody like me at the Capitol fighting for all the things that we care about. And please reach out to me on Twitter, on Facebook, on email, phones. Like, I believe together we can really create some important change. And I know that's really hard in this moment. People are like, oh, politics, but there's a lot of what's the alternative, right? That we just don't get engaged, and we should be engaged. And so I just want to say, you're right, Stephanie, we have a moment in time to really create the changes that we've been wanting to create for a long time. And so I'm here, let's do it together. Again, shout out to my local folks. I love y'all. And really to AFT for all your hard work. Advocacy is sometimes a thankless job, and y'all do it with grace and with love and humility, and just honored to be your partner in solidarity, your union sister from another union, but still here to get it done. And so thank you all for all your hard work.
Well, thank you all for being here and giving up your time. And if you are not a part of Texas AFT, consider joining us. Thank you all, and you all have a good night.